Perfectionism has always carried a strange duality. It is admired as a symbol of discipline, precision, and the pursuit of excellence, yet it quietly corrodes the human heart. To outsiders, the perfectionist seems noble, meticulous, hard-working, and committed to high ideals. But beneath that polished surface lies a storm, a fear that one mistake, one flaw, will shatter the illusion of worth. In European thought, perfection was once equated with divinity, the flawless form, the pure symmetry of Michelangelo's David. But when ordinary humans attempt to embody the divine, suffering begins. We become prisoners of our own standards, unable to rest, unable to forgive. Perfectionism promises mastery, but delivers fragility. It whispers that order will protect us from chaos, yet the more we chase control, the more chaos we create within. Every flaw becomes a personal failure, every imperfection an attack on identity. The irony is cruel. The closer we come to perfection, the further we drift from peace. What if the need to be flawless is not a strength at all, but a plea for love misunderstood? To understand perfectionism, we must draw a delicate line between aspiration and obsession. The first is a force of creation, the artist refining their brushstroke, the scientist chasing truth. The second is a cage built from fear. Psychology defines perfectionism not as a quest for excellence, but as a chronic dissatisfaction with anything less than ideal. According to research by Frost and Hewitt, it stems from rigid self-evaluations and an internalized belief that love and approval must be earned through flawlessness. At its healthiest, perfectionism gives birth to innovation, artistry, and precision. But when it grows toxic, it turns the mind inward, a critic that never sleeps. The perfectionist becomes both architect and prisoner of their mental fortress, guarding against imperfection as if it were sin. Every undone task, every minor error feels catastrophic. In that endless vigilance, joy fades, replaced by anxiety disguised as responsibility. And still, the voice within insists, "You can do better." But what if that voice never learns to say, "You've done enough"? There is a moment when perfectionism becomes almost divine, when the desire to create something flawless lifts human effort beyond its limits. Think of Michelangelo lying on his back for years beneath the Sistine Chapel ceiling, repainting sections that others already deem perfect. Or Beethoven, losing his hearing yet revising each symphony note by note, chasing the harmony he could no longer hear. Such minds remind us that perfection, when guided by passion rather than fear, can produce beauty that transcends time. In the classroom, it's the student who refuses to submit a careless paper. In the kitchen, the baker who remakes a cake 3 times to achieve the right texture. These are moments when perfectionism fuels excellence. Yet even in these triumphs, there's a shadow, because behind every masterpiece lies exhaustion, sleepless nights, and a silent terror of mediocrity. The question lingers, must greatness always come with pain? Or have we mistaken suffering for devotion? Perfectionism becomes dangerous the moment ambition hardens into obsession. The same discipline that once propelled success begins to corrode from within. High standards turn into invisible shackles, binding the mind to an impossible ideal. Modern psychology has shown that chronic perfectionists report higher levels of anxiety and burnout, especially among professionals and students in competitive environments. The very fuel that drives them forward becomes the fire that consumes them. When failure arrives, as it inevitably does, the perfectionist does not see it as part of growth, but as proof of personal inadequacy. Each mistake is magnified, replayed endlessly like a broken record. Even success brings little relief, for the joy fades quickly, replaced by the next target, the next impossible goal. The pursuit never ends because the destination doesn't exist. What if the perfectionist's greatest flaw is not imperfection itself, but the belief that life can ever be perfect at all? At the heart of perfectionism lies fear, the silent conviction that to be imperfect is to be unworthy. This fear drives the need to control, to predict, to polish every corner of life until it gleams. Yet behind that control is fragility, a trembling self that cannot bear rejection or disappointment. Many perfectionists grew up believing love was conditional, that affection had to be earned through achievement. So they learned to equate order with safety, performance with value. But control is an illusion. Life slips through the cracks of every plan, every carefully arranged schedule. And when it does, the perfectionist feels exposed, as if chaos has unmasked their deepest flaw. The cleaner the surface, the more tumult hides beneath it: anxiety, shame, the constant whisper, "You are not enough." Perfectionism promises protection from pain, yet it creates a prison lined with mirrors that reflect every imperfection tenfold. What if letting go is the only way to truly feel free? Perfectionism does not always announce itself with grandeur. It lives quietly in daily rituals. The worker rewriting an email for the 10th time, the mother scolding herself for a messy kitchen, the lover rehearsing every word before a conversation. These small acts, born of care, slowly evolve into burdens. A perfectionist may find peace only in control, comfort only in completion. Yet life, by nature, resists control. A child spills milk, a colleague misses a deadline, and suddenly the world feels wrong. In offices, such people are praised for their reliability, yet they suffer silently from sleepless nights and relentless self-criticism. At home, their families walk on eggshells, fearing disapproval. In love, they strive to be flawless partners and end up exhausted, resenting both themselves and the ones they wish to please. Every gesture of perfection hides a wound, a need to prove worth through performance. But can love, art, or happiness survive under the weight of such precision? Once perfectionism takes root, it feeds on repetition, the endless need to redo, refine, correct. What begins as diligence becomes ritual. Psychologists call it the loop of control. The mind convinces itself that if it just fixes one more detail, the anxiety will subside, but it never does. Each attempt to master chaos only deepens the fear of losing control. The perfectionist becomes both victim and warden of this cycle, trapped between relief and torment. When life refuses to obey their standards, when projects fail, relationships falter, or outcomes remain uncertain, despair sets in. The world starts to look hostile, unpredictable, unsafe. Instead of adjusting expectations, the perfectionist tightens their grip, demanding more precision, more control. But perfection is a horizon. The closer one walks toward it, the farther it retreats. And in that endless chase, the joy of simply being human slips away. What remains is not mastery, but exhaustion disguised as purpose. Science has begun to map what poets once intuited, that perfectionism, when left unchecked, mutates into illness. Studies by psychologists Paul Hewitt and Gordon Flett reveal strong links between perfectionism and disorders like depression, obsessive-compulsive behavior, eating disorders, and even substance abuse. Beneath the polished exterior lies chronic stress, insomnia, and an unrelenting sense of inadequacy. The perfectionist's pursuit of control begins to erode the very systems that sustain life: sleep, emotion, and health. What's tragic is that society often praises this sickness. We admire the tireless worker, the flawless performer, without seeing the cost: panic attacks, isolation, silent breakdowns behind closed doors. The perfectionist becomes addicted to productivity, mistaking exhaustion for achievement. Their body pleads for rest, but the mind whispers, "You're almost there." In truth, they are chasing a ghost, one that grows sharper the closer they get. When success itself becomes poison, what medicine remains? Perfectionism often hides behind virtue. It appears as integrity, responsibility, even morality. The perfectionist insists on punctuality, neatness, and order, not merely as habits, but as moral laws. Their room is immaculate, their tasks completed without delay, their promises kept at any cost. To others, such devotion seems admirable, but beneath that moral clarity lies rigidity, an inability to forgive mistakes, whether in others or in themselves. What begins as principle slowly turns into punishment. This moral armor shields deep insecurity. The perfectionist clings to ethics not out of compassion, but fear. Fear that one misstep will expose their flaws. They live by rules so strict that life itself becomes mechanical. Ironically, the more they pursue purity, the more they lose tenderness. In their world, mercy feels like weakness, compromise like betrayal. But what is morality without empathy? When perfection replaces kindness, goodness turns cold. Across European history, the pursuit of perfection has been glorified as a cultural virtue. From the symmetry of Renaissance architecture to the meticulous craftsmanship of Swiss watches, the continent has long worshipped precision. The Protestant work ethic turned diligence into destiny. The belief that one's worth could be proven through flawless effort. Over centuries, this ideal seeped into education, art, and personal identity, shaping a civilization that equated excellence with moral worth. Yet this heritage carries a shadow. The same culture that built cathedrals and symphonies also bred generations terrified of mediocrity. In a society where good enough feels like failure, rest becomes guilt, and leisure feels undeserved. The modern European professional, still chasing centuries-old ideals, wakes up at 3 a.m. answering emails, a monk in a digital monastery. Perhaps the question is no longer how to achieve perfection, but how to escape its inheritance without betraying the beauty it once created. Perfectionism rarely appears cruel at first glance. It hides in the guise of care. "I only want what's best," says the parent, the manager, the lover. Yet under that care often lies coercion. Perfectionists, unable to tolerate flaws in themselves, begin imposing their standards on others. They correct, criticize, and control in the name of improvement. A child grows up fearing mistakes. An employee loses confidence. A partner feels constantly inadequate. What looks like discipline slowly becomes emotional violence. This control poisons relationships. The perfectionist believes they are helping others do better, yet what they really offer is conditional acceptance, love that must be earned through compliance. Over time, those around them withdraw, silenced by the pressure to please. The perfectionist, misunderstood and lonely, concludes that no one cares as deeply as they do. In truth, their pursuit of perfection has erased the very thing they sought to protect: connection. When love becomes a checklist, tenderness dies. Few prisons are lonelier than the one built by perfection. The perfectionist longs to be understood, yet cannot reveal their vulnerability. They smile through exhaustion, hide mistakes, and wear success like armor. Others see competence. They feel emptiness. Friendships grow distant because admitting weakness feels shameful. Even love becomes complicated. They crave intimacy, yet fear that true closeness will expose their flaws. So they retreat, polishing their solitude until it shines like virtue. Inside, however, the silence grows heavy. No applause ever feels enough. No success fills the void left by unspoken insecurity. Their relationships crumble not from lack of care, but from the inability to show imperfection. The tragedy is quiet but profound. The more perfectly they live, the less human they feel. Perhaps the deepest loneliness is not being unloved by others, but being unable to love oneself without conditions. Deep within the perfectionist mind lives a relentless critic, a voice sharper than any external judgment. It whispers at dawn and echoes in the silence of night. You could have done better. You should have known more. This voice often carries the tones of the past, a demanding parent, a strict teacher, or a society that measured worth by achievement. Over time, it fuses with the self until the line between ambition and self-punishment disappears. Psychologists describe this as internalized perfectionism, where the critic becomes one's constant companion. It does not rest when success is achieved. Instead, it raises the bar higher, ensuring the struggle never ends. No apology, no effort, no rest feels justified. And yet, within that harsh monologue lies a wounded child, desperate for reassurance, for someone to finally say, "You've done enough." Until that voice is met with compassion, the perfectionist remains trapped in a war waged entirely within. There comes a moment when the mind, exhausted from endless striving, begins to question its own war against flaws. What if imperfection isn't failure, but truth? In Japanese philosophy, there is a concept called wabi-sabi, the art of finding beauty in the incomplete, the aged, the asymmetrical. A cracked bowl repaired with gold becomes more precious, not less. Western culture, obsessed with symmetry and control, often forgets that life itself is uneven, transient, gloriously unpredictable. To embrace imperfection is to return to humanity. It is to accept that love may falter, that art may never be finished, that peace comes not from control, but surrender. When we allow the brushstroke to tremble, the song to waver, the heart to make mistakes, something miraculous happens. Authenticity replaces performance. Perfection isolates, but imperfection connects. And perhaps in the gentle acceptance of what is broken, we finally glimpse what it means to be whole. Recovery from perfectionism does not come through achievement, but through gentleness. The first step is learning to speak to oneself with the same kindness once reserved for others. Psychologist Kristin Neff calls this self-compassion, the ability to acknowledge suffering without judgment. Instead of punishing failure, we learn to comfort it. Through practices like mindfulness, journaling, or therapy, the perfectionist begins to notice the harsh inner dialogue and replace it with warmth. Science supports this transformation. Studies show that people who practice self-compassion experience lower stress levels, greater motivation, and deeper emotional resilience. Paradoxically, forgiving ourselves for imperfection often makes us perform better, not worse, because we act from courage rather than fear. Healing is not about lowering standards, but about expanding the heart. When kindness takes the place of punishment, growth becomes joyful again. The question shifts from how perfect can I be to how gently can I treat myself while trying. There is immense liberation in realizing that perfection was never the goal. Humanity was. When one stops editing every word, smoothing every edge, and apologizing for every misstep, life breathes again. The poet Rilke once wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage." To embrace our flaws is to meet those dragons, to live with authenticity rather than performance. True confidence is not the absence of mistakes, but the courage to stand in their light. When the perfectionist finally lays down their weapons, the lists, the judgments, the impossible standards, they rediscover something long forgotten: curiosity. Suddenly, laughter returns, art feels playful again, and relationships soften. Freedom is not found in control, but in acceptance. To be flawed is not to be broken, it is to be beautifully, undeniably alive. In the age of social media, perfectionism has found its most seductive disguise. The curated image, the flawless selfie, the productivity post, each becomes a silent competition of who can appear most composed. Platforms designed for connection now amplify comparison. Psychologists call it the digital perfection loop. We post to be validated, we edit to be admired, and in the process, we lose touch with who we really are. Every filter promises confidence, but delivers only anxiety. The internet rewards illusion. Behind the glowing screens are millions quietly suffocating under the pressure to be enough. Even rest must now be aesthetic, even sadness, photogenic. It's no longer perfectionism confined to individuals, it's a culture-wide performance. The tragedy is subtle. The more we polish our digital selves, the blurrier our real ones become. What if, in chasing virtual flawlessness, we've forgotten how to be human in reality? At some point, the perfectionist, exhausted, questioning, must confront the most haunting question of all: what is enough? For centuries, society has measured worth in output, beauty, and control. Yet every time the summit is reached, another appears higher still. This endless ascent mirrors humanity's oldest delusion, that fulfillment lies somewhere beyond the next success. But happiness, philosophers remind us, is not a finish line. It's a state of being. When we pause long enough to ask, what if I stopped here? Something shifts. The silence feels terrifying at first, then peaceful. Enough might simply mean being present in this imperfect moment, alive and aware. To be enough is to recognize that worth isn't earned, it's inherent. And perhaps that is the wisdom perfectionists fear most, that the mountain they've been climbing was never meant to be conquered, only witnessed. Acceptance is not surrender, it is understanding. It is the quiet wisdom that says, this is where I am, and it is enough for now. When perfectionists begin to practice acceptance, life regains its softness. Mistakes become lessons rather than verdicts, and rest becomes an act of courage instead of guilt. True growth does not bloom in tension, but in trust. Trust that life unfolds even without constant supervision. Psychologically, acceptance rewires the nervous system. It calms the body's constant alertness, allowing creativity and empathy to return. Spiritually, it redefines success. No longer about control, but about connection. In that stillness, we see that beauty was never in the flawless, but in the sincere. Perfection collapses under scrutiny, but authenticity endures. To accept oneself is to reconcile with reality, and in that reconciliation lies the quiet power to heal, to love, and to finally rest.